Good evening, everyone. We will now begin. The meetings being held tonight are public meetings held under the Planning Act. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of the public meetings are collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. Persons speaking at the meeting are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Additionally, interested members of the public can email the committee clerk or the assigned planner if they wish to be notified regarding a particular application. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning Services. The first portion of tonight's meeting is to present planning applications in a public forum as detailed in the community meeting report, or to deny. After the planner's presentation, committee members will be able to ask questions of staff, followed by members of the public. Following the question and answer period, this committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council, who will finally have say on the applications. Following council decisions, notice will be circulated in accordance to the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision to the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or public body does not make an oral submission at the public meeting or make written submission to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. The purpose of the community meeting is to provide the applicant with an opportunity to present a potential development proposal in the early stages of the development process and to seek feedback from the public and members of the planning committee. Before a completed application is submitted to the city, anyone who attends a community meeting may present an oral submission and/or provide a written or on the proposals being presented. I walked up the stairs really fast earlier, so a lot of breath. I will now invite the applicant to present the file for 22-28 Ellis Street.
No. And we're on. Perfect. Through the chair, thank you for having me this evening. My name is Holly Newitt, and I am a planner with FO10 Planning and Design. I'm here this evening to present an application for zoning bylaw amendment and consent to sever at 22-28 Ellis Street. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Dave Nanton, as well as the property owner, should members of the committee or public have any questions for the applicant. The site is located north of Princess Street and east of Division Street in the Skeleton Park neighborhood of downtown Kingston. The area is primarily characterized by a mix of residential uses and commercial uses. Community facilities and public parks are within walking distance. The site is also well serviced by Kingston Public Transit. The site itself is an irregularly shaped lot with a total lot area of approximately 716 square meters and frontage of approximately 34 meters on Ellis Street. The site currently contains 4 townhouse dwelling units with off-street parking to the west and rear yard amenity. I would like to note that there is a discrepancy between the online city mapping and the survey that was prepared for the application, so the lot boundaries throughout the presentation may vary. The site is designated residential in the City of Kingston official plan. This designation permits a variety of residential uses and limits development to infill and intensification in an effort to enhance and protect stable neighborhoods. The site is currently zoned Urban Residential 5, or UR5, in the Kingston Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw. This zone permits a range of low-density residential uses, though it does not permit townhouse dwellings as of right. It is proposed to sever the western portion of the site to construct one additional townhouse dwelling, sharing a common party wall with the existing townhouses. This new addition will accommodate 3 one-bedroom dwelling units over 3 stories. The existing driveway will be extended in order to access rear yard parking for vehicles and bicycles. A reduction to the number of vehicular parking spaces is proposed, but 1 bicycle parking space will be provided per unit. A heritage review has been prepared to inform the architectural elevations of the new dwelling to ensure it is in keeping with the surrounding area. A zoning bylaw amendment is required for the retained lot to reflect certain site deficiencies as a result of the proposed severance. Specifically, a decreased minimum interior setback is proposed, as well as a decrease in the number of vehicular parking spaces, as mentioned previously. There is also proposed acknowledgement for the existence of the driveway on the adjacent severed lot. Similarly, a zoning bylaw amendment is required on the severed lot. Amendments are sought to permit the proposed townhouse dwelling unit, as well as a decrease in the minimum lot area and minimum lot frontage to reflect the more compact built form. A decrease in minimum aggregate interior setback is required to acknowledge the common party wall, and the decrease in minimum lot area will also trigger a decrease in the landscaped open space on site. As mentioned previously, a decrease in the number of vehicular parking spaces is proposed, as well as acknowledgement of the vehicular and bicycle parking spaces on the adjacent retained lands. A decreased drive aisle width will ensure an efficient parking area in the rear yard. While many of these amendments reflect the establishment of a slightly smaller urban residential lot, the functionality of this site will not be hindered as a result of the proposed amendments. In summary, a zoning bylaw amendment and consent to sever is proposed for the site in order to permit the construction of 1 additional townhouse dwelling. The proposed development reflects the surrounding neighborhood and is compatible with adjacent residential uses. A zoning bylaw amendment will establish site-specific provisions on the site. The application is consistent with policies of the provincial policy statement and conforms with the City of Kingston official plan, and as such is thought to represent good land use planning. I now welcome any questions from members of the committee or the public.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the members of the public? Is there anyone online? No. All right, so we'll move on to questions from the committee. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing as none, this is the only file for our community meeting tonight, so I will close the community meeting at, it is now 6:09. So now I'll call the meeting to order at 6:09 p.m. Can I have a mover and seconder for approval of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Shave, seconded by Councillor Oosterhoff. All in favor? And that passes. And do I have a mover and seconder for confirmation of the minutes for the Planning Committee meeting number 09-2024 held on Thursday, April 18th, 2024? Moved by Councillor Glenn and seconded by Councillor Rosanek. All in favor? And that passes. So are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Oh, Ed, I'd forgotten, there was an addendum to the agenda. Are we all good? Can we just get a vote on that for the event? Okay, thanks, just for the record. So there are no delegations, there are no briefings. So the first item of business is the Rental Housing Community Improvement Plan. Can I invite staff to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So tonight we're here to speak to report PC 24031 on the proposed rental housing community improvement plan. So thank you, and good evening, Chair and members of Planning Committee. My name is Laura Flaherty. I'm a project manager in planning services with the City of Kingston. I'm here to give a brief presentation on the proposed rental housing community improvement plan, or CIP, as we'll call it in this presentation. Next slide, please. So as you'll recall, Ms. Agnew provided a detailed presentation at the last Planning Committee 2 weeks ago. At that meeting, no members of the public spoke, and staff fielded a number of questions from members of Planning Committee on the proposed CIP. So for tonight's presentation, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the proposed CIP, summarize the changes that have been made in the last 2 weeks, and also provide a summary of the opinion and recommendations that are presented in report PC-24031. So as a reminder, this CIP is considered a high priority housing initiative in the city's approved Housing Accelerator Action Fund. This rental housing CIP was also identified twice within Council's strategic plan as a concrete action to help support housing affordability and increase the supply of purpose-built apartments. Tonight's report forms the basis of a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act, as a CIP is required to follow the same process as an application for an official plan amendment. A notice of the statutory public meeting was provided in the Kingston Wig Standard on March 26th with a courtesy notice on April 23rd. We've received no pieces of public correspondence. However, we have received feedback from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, which I'll speak to at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So at its core, the CIP is intended to help increase the supply of purpose-built rental apartment buildings and accelerate the timing of planned apartment buildings to bring more rental units on the market sooner through 2 different grant programs. So the primary grant program in the CIP is called the Tax Increment Equivalent Grant Program, or the TEAG. And for any qualifying apartment buildings, this would result in a grant that's equivalent to 50% of the municipal portion of the incremental property taxes. So that's the difference in property taxes between pre-development and post-development for 2 years following occupancy of the building. On top of the TEAG program, where a building includes units that are affordable for low and moderate income households, a bonus grant will be provided that has the effect of doubling those TEAG benefits for the affordable units. The CIP includes a secondary grant program called the Vacant Land Tax Program, or the VLT, and the VLT is intended to be provided for vacant properties for a maximum of 2 years during construction. So while it's under construction for up to 2 years, the VLT would provide a grant that's equal to the municipal portion of the property taxes for that vacant property. Next slide, please. So this slide obviously identifies a couple of the detailed eligibility requirements. Obviously, within the proposed CIP itself, there are a number of additional eligibility requirements that are identified. This highlights the need to register an agreement on title to secure the units as rental for a 15-year program. For the VLT program, the building needs to actually be actively under construction in order to receive the VLT grant. A developer can't just pull building permits and not do anything and still receive that VLT grant. They actually need to be under construction with foundations being poured and actively progressing towards the completion and occupancy of that building. To obtain the TEAG benefits, occupancy permits must be pulled within 3 years of receiving the building permits, and any properties that are receiving brownfield funding through the brownfield CIP may also be eligible for the CIP. Next slide, please. So as I indicated earlier, we've made a couple of amendments since the CIP was presented to the Planning Committee 2 weeks ago. We've added in a new section that would allow Council to pass a motion in response to a site-specific request to expand the eligibility of the program to affordable ownership housing developments, such as cooperative housing. We've also received supportive comments from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. They're included in Exhibit C to the staff report. The comments requested a couple of technical changes to the language of the CIP, so we've made those changes in the version of the CIP that's recommended in the report tonight. The changes include updating or changing some of the definitions. We've added a couple of references to the planning or to the Municipal Act. We've clarified methods for issuing the grant, added an expiration date, and allowed an appeal to council where a property owner disagrees with staff's determination on eligibility. Next slide, please. So in summary, financial services are satisfied that the grants are within the financial capabilities of the city. The proposed bylaws would enable grants to be provided that are aimed at addressing the housing affordability crisis and low rental vacancy rates by helping to reduce financial barriers to the construction and help to increase the overall supply of rental units. The bylaws have regard to matters of provincial interest. They're consistent with the provincial policy statement. They conform with the city's official plan, and they represent good planning. The report includes a time-sensitive recommendation to bring it to next week's council meeting, reflecting the urgency in getting this program implemented as quickly as possible. And the recommendation would approve the city-initiated application and would present 2 bylaws to council for all 3 readings. The first bylaw would designate a new community improvement plan project area across the urban boundary, and the second bylaw would adopt the rental housing CIP. Thank you. That concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions from the committee? Councillor Oosterhoff.
Bear with me there, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to get my camera going here, or my system. Yeah, thanks for that. I hope there's a few questions. I'm just, I think that was good. Thank you, Ms. Flaherty, for that report. It helped me a lot. I'm still trying to understand the whole picture, but is there, so most of all, how does it reduce financial barriers? Besides, I like the idea, it's reducing all the extra costs, I guess, is what this is, right? Is that, can you just paint that picture once more, how it does that? Is it because of the tax breaks and deferrals? And where will we see something like this, like for what we just saw on Ellis Street too? Is that an example of it? Or can you give us a bit of an example?
Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So I think, when we're talking about financial barriers to the construction of new rental apartment buildings, I think it's really important to really state the obvious that as a municipality, we're not the people who are developing the rental apartment buildings. This would obviously be a developer or a property owner. So there are a number of financial barriers to the actual construction of buildings that would be, directly experienced by those developers that the city has no control over. So, when we're talking to developers, there are a number of barriers that they've identified from a financial perspective that are identified on a pro forma. So that would be the increase in borrowing costs that they've experienced in recent history. Sorry, Paige or Ms. Agnew, did you want to interrupt there? I just saw you running around in the background. I wasn't sure. Okay, sorry about that. And from a municipal perspective, I think the one piece that we've looked at that we're able to help to alleviate as a financial barrier is the component of property taxes that we would be charging.
Yes. Yeah.
So through a CIP, it actually gives the city the ability to give financial grants. And the intent is to really look at the pieces that are connected to the municipal barriers from a financial perspective.
Yes.
That there are a lot of external barriers that we can't control.
That's helpful. I think I was trying to see what we could circle to see what is the most significant impact, and I see that the barriers. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm comfortable with this.
Okay. Councillor Shaves.
Thank you. How many projects have been approved so far by planning or council?
Mr. Barr?
Thanks, and through you, Chair. Clarification, Councillor Shaves, for what calendar year?
For this year? So far?
Total number of projects I can pull up quickly for you, but the number of new residential units passed through Planning Committee is just over 1,000 units between December 3rd and today.
Okay, that appears to be a sufficient number. And how many total projects, approved projects, are there in the queue waiting for building permits to be submitted?
Mr. Barr?
Thanks, and through you, Chair. I believe that's a difficult number to peg down because until an application is submitted for a building permit, number of projects, so individual sites that would, bring forward multiple numbers of units is unknown. We have a number of site plan control applications currently under review, but a successful site plan control application does not always mean that a project is going to move immediately forward to a building permit because there are numerous potential financial issues that could slow down the development of a project or other externalities that are just beyond the city's control or even beyond the city's knowledge. So that part is difficult unless you're looking for the number of units in the pending and committed report. I'm happy to provide clarification there.
Yes, that would be sufficient.
I think I'm pretty sure we're around 8,000 in committed, and then we have a bunch of additional in the pending. So we do, the issue isn't with the number of units that we have approved that can go to construction. The problem is that there is a barrier to those units actually being materialized into the construction industry and then becoming occupied for residential housing. So this program is really intended to try to help address some of the barriers that Ms. Flaherty has previously identified, whether we're talking about borrowing rates, labor shortages, material costs, all of those pieces. Cumulatively, I think we've seen, certainly not just in Kingston, but across the province and in the country, the impact of mortgage rates and increased borrowing costs associated with slow housing starts everywhere. So this is one of our potential options that we've put forward from staff's perspective to try to address what we can do within the tools that are available to us. Again, utilizing the Housing Accelerator Fund money to help backstop if we don't get the additional growth, to have this be like basically a net neutral program over the 3 years that it's being proposed.
Thanks, and through you, Chair, I just have one more point to add. Of the 1,000 units that we have approved this year, I know of a number of projects, especially some of the larger ones, that do have difficulty actually moving from zoning approval to site plan control. So about half the units that we have approved so far this year, I know, are facing financial difficulties on coming to the market and being underwritten by CMHC. In addition, we have another tower that I know is not on the books for this year. So even though they have zoning approval, it's not a project that they're looking to immediately build this year. So I also track projects that I think will build out every calendar year to try and selectively target ones to bring forward to meet our housing goals. And I can't count on about 600 or 700 units of the 1,000 that we've approved so far this year to actually materialize into a building permit in 2024.
Okay, but hasn't this been an issue even with last year with high interest rates and issue with supply? But we were able to meet our goals and even surpass them?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, for sure. If you're referring to our performance in 2023, definitely we were able to meet our provincial housing numbers. We know that the city received a bonus associated with being able to meet those provincial housing targets. On top of some of the additional financial elements we've talked about, again, this program is being delivered to council by way of the strategic plan. It was something that council asked us to look at. The previous task force on housing asked us to look at creating a CIP to help, particularly with affordable housing, which is addressed through this program. So we do see it as just one tool that's available to us. We do have funding available to us that we normally don't have. So this is not being an impact or creating any kind of burden on the tax base. And we do feel that it's an important program to help us continue to reach our housing targets, that 1,400 a year that we're required to reach each year over the next 3 years associated with our funding agreement with CMHC.
Thank you. But even though 600 out of the 1,000 that got approved may not surpass or come to light this year, we still have another 8,000 or even, was it 16,000 in the queue. I'll just move on. Were there consultation with the development community in regards to this?
Yeah, thank you, and through you, we did have some meetings with the development community specifically to look at the framework and to get some feedback on our overall methodology and what we were proposing. Certainly as part of that, we received a lot of positive feedback. We also received some feedback suggesting that the incentives the city was providing, certainly there was a desire for them to be to a greater or a deeper level than what we were promoting there with the 100% over the 2 years and the 200% for affordable units. But again, in doing the detailed financial analysis that we did in collaboration with Altus, and then we had our own team internally in taxation double check all of those numbers, we felt that the numbers we presented to you tonight represented a financially sustainable model that the treasurer was comfortable with, and that we felt was achievable relative to sort of that revenue neutral state over the 3 years of the program, and then again having the confidence of the additional funding if for some reason we don't achieve those growth numbers to help us continue to apply everything that we can to balance the operational budget that we bring to you each year as part of the council deliberations.
Thank you. Were there any building permits that were submitted prior to the consultation process that were pulled or placed on hold with this announcement?
Thank you, and through you, there aren't any specifically that I'm aware of. Ms. Keebner-Hunt may be aware. Certainly as part of the consultations that we made, there are provisions related to the type of legislation that enables this program. So we understood from the very beginning it wouldn't be a program that we would be able to apply retroactively. Again, the whole purpose of this is to generate additional new housing units beyond what we were hoping in terms of our overall numbers that we put into the operational budget as part of net new growth. And so I'm not aware of specifically ones that are being held, but certainly any that were in progress, the program wouldn't apply to because it's not a retroactive program. It's only net new applications after the time of council approval and the appeal period being cleared.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Lisa, do you have additional information?
Yeah, I can add to that through you, Mr. Chair. So Councillor Shaves, yeah, there was a couple of applications that came in that have been waiting for the funding specifically, so they haven't got their permits issued. It amounts to about just under 500 units. And I just wanted to add to a little bit earlier with the pending and committed, because I did take a look at how many committed units that we have within the city of Kingston, which is around 8,000 to 9,000 that have been approved through the planning process, and only about 10% of them have moved to building permits at this time.
Okay, thank you. So that's potentially about 500 units that we could be in the queue, so be, if these went through, be on par with what we were last year. You mentioned, now correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I misinterpreted, is this plan going to be retroactive to buildings that are already under construction?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, no, it's not retroactive. Okay. It's only net new applications that would come in after the approval of the program.
Okay. And to confirm, if I heard the presentation correctly, the vacant land tax grant program could be used at the same time with the CIP, so they could have the tax break during the construction and after the construction?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. The program was designed specifically to apply the vacant land tax so that there would be a portion of financial relief during the time of construction when there's a lot of outlaying of expenses, no generation of revenue because the building is not yet occupied, and then the taxation portion would be applying after occupancy when the tax classification kicks in to provide those years of relief while the building is just getting up and going and starting to generate revenue after there'd been, an outlying of hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions in most cases associated with the construction of these buildings.
Thank you. Last question. Did we not just approve the use of security bonds for financial assistance for developers?
Yes, and through you, we did prepare a new policy that allows surety bonds as a form of financial bonding above and beyond what we've historically done, which has been through letters of credit or cash. So that's correct.
So that will help them financially as well. So because their financial doesn't have to be tied into their buildings, correct, their developments?
Thank you, and through you, yes, the surety bond process, and certainly this has been another recommendation that was put forward through the provincial consultations, was just a much more flexible tool relative to not tying up capital associated with projects for a very long period of time and creating some additional flexibility that doesn't exist with letters of credit specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Are there anyone else with questions? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. May I ask if there's a huge uptake on this and say there's 10,000 units, is there any chance that the money might run out? Like how much money is there available to help offset taxes over the next few years?
Thank you, and through you. So council may be aware that we did receive 27.6 million. About 50% of that we are funneling directly towards the creation of affordable housing projects specifically. That does leave us about half of the money that that we've allocated for other initiatives. Again, this one is meant to be revenue neutral, but we've looked at what the financial impact could be and what the additional units could be if for some reason we had huge pieces. I think from come forward, and I think what the treasurer has said specifically is that because of the benefit of that positive net new tax assessment that becomes a permanent influx of cash, that we could manage certainly within the 3-year period associated with this program, regardless of how many units. But certainly we would also have the ability, for some reason, if we received like a huge number of applications, the city would have the ability to, terminate the program before the end of it. If we've achieved the overall outcome of really trying to get that net new number of units, then certainly we wouldn't have to put it on for the entire time. So we'll be monitoring it on a year-to-year basis.
Okay, and just to make sure that I understand the calculations on the first one, not the vacant land tax, but assuming that there's a piece of land that is already city-owned and therefore is not paying taxes, when you're considering the post-construction tax amount, it would be the average of 0 and the future tax possibility divided by 2, is that correct? So 50% of future taxes?
It would be 50% of what the taxation class is at the time of occupancy. So when that building moves from whatever tax classification it was in to being occupied and assuming that new tax classification, it would be 50% of that value.
Wonderful. And
each year for 2 years.
Great. And when can a developer, say, apply for this?
Should council support the application, or sorry, the program when it comes to you next Tuesday night, there is appeal period under the Planning Act because it's enacted under planning legislation. So there's a 20-day period of appeal, and then after that, we'll have the applications ready to go for net new building permit applications. So if all goes well, we should have the program up and running in June.
Great. And so it'll be 3 years from there, from June of this year.
Typically, when we're going to start to see things hit the books is, when those permits have been approved. So the vacant land tax portion happens during the time of construction, but the actual tax grant itself wouldn't be allocated until post-occupancy. Most large multi-res buildings usually have a construction timing of about 24 months, and then you have to front end some time there associated with the building permit review. So we looked at that and forecasted it out when we were looking at the cash flow analysis, so approximately 3 years.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? Oh, Jeffrey Walker, you wanted to say something to add?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I was just going to add to the last point being made about if we get a large number of units being brought on board through this incentive, that's just all the better for us. After the incentives, which are going to be revenue neutral, are done, it's just more tax revenue into the city every year following. So it would be a good thing to have more units. The more, the better.
Okay, thank you. One last call. Does anybody else who hasn't spoken? No? You want to go for a second round? Yeah, but you would have to move to do a second round and get a seconder. Okay, all right. So are there any members of the public online or here? No. All right, so can I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Osanik. Is there any discussion? Councillor Shaves.
Just a follow-up to Councillor McLaren's comment there about running out of money. I thought this really had no cash involved with it. It was just basically they wouldn't be paying any property taxes or half the property taxes in the first 2 years that they're occupied. So is there actually any money flowing here?
Thank you, and I can take a stab at that, and Mr. Walker may want to correct me since he's the taxation expert. The cash we're talking about is really more of a cash flow. So if for some reason in the budgets we present to you each year, when we're looking at forecasting future years, we're accommodating for a certain amount of growth. We look at what the building activity is anticipated to be because we're tracking larger projects and all of those pieces over multiple years. So there's a period of time where we're evaluating that, and then as part of the budget preparation, we put in projection numbers of how much net new growth, and that becomes part of how we balance the overall municipal budget with keeping taxation increases wherever council's asked us to keep them. So certainly what would happen is if for some reason we didn't achieve that growth, and there was we didn't earn as much as we thought we were going to, there would be money to help backstop that associated with the program. And then certainly if we overshoot it and there's years where we're doing a reduction because of the grant itself, we would have the half money to put in if we needed to. But ideally, again, it's just the way the cash flow. Mr. Walker, I don't know if you want to explain it. I don't know if I did a great job of that, explaining exactly how the cash flow component of it works.
For you, Mr. Chair, I think you did a great job of explaining how the cash flow component works. The only area that I would be worried about is if we did not hit the growth assumptions. That's where we would be using the half funding to come in. The part for the vacant land taxes is not a large enough cash component that it would affect our budgets that much. So that part I am not as worried about. It would simply be if the incentives were not enough to bring in and the growth that we're looking for, that we would need half funding to support.
Because one of the big selling points about this program is the fact it's supposed to be net zero.
Correct.
So, but we're now talking about the potentially of running out of money.
No, I think the point is so in the budget, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Walker, so for 2025, we've probably estimated somewhere around 800 units minimum. So, and we usually conservatively estimate that in the budget because we don't want to inflate our numbers so high when we're looking at future projections trying to manage the operational gap that we feel like we're doing something that is risky. So we tend to estimate quite conservatively, again, looking at what we have in the pipeline in terms of major projects and number of units, and that's used to generate what the number would be for net new tax assessment growth. That gets piped right in as a budget line, and it helps to balance out the overall operational demands of inflation and all those pieces that we're dealing with. So again, on the issue of trying to get as many new residential units coming through as possible, besides the 1,400 units that we have relative to the half funding, right now we're at 100 and something units for the year. Our projection in the budget is near 800. So right now, if we don't get to that 800, the net new tax assessment that we have projected in the budget to help balance 2025 will not be realized. And that's where we would have half money potentially to help balance that, but that's where as a municipality it becomes difficult. So trying to not even only hit that number, but exceed it is really, the exceedance is how it pays for the whole piece. If we don't hit those revenue projections overall as a city, that's a larger financial issue we have separate of anything to do with this CIP, if that makes sense. Mr. Walker, if you have anything to add to that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that is the way that I would explain it as well. Each year we're projecting an amount of growth, and if we are short on that growth, then it affects the budget. The program is self-funding in that the growth is there before we are going to be paying the incentive on any of it. So that is not a concern that I have, the CIP being funded through the tax base.
But would that not be included in the budgetary, knowing that they've already been approved for this program, that the actual tax base would not be included for the first couple of years? And it also wasn't also mentioned that the first sort of payouts or tax breaks wouldn't happen for the, probably 3 years, 2027. So this should not affect our budget until 2027. Is that not correct?
Correct. Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
So that should not affect our 2025 budget.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. So I still have issues with this project. I understand the basis behind it. However, I've spoken with a number of residents. I actually received change in the mail from a resident who didn't have a return address about $1.75 last year, from like the previous budget, about our increase, and he couldn't afford a tax increase. And I've also spoken to some small businesses who are feeling the crunch of increased taxes, property taxes. So here we are giving incentives to perceptionally our developers who are deemed in the eyes of our constituents who are rich and wealthy. Even though we need these residential units, we have many people and businesses within the city who are hurting with property taxes and with the recession, high interest rates and everything else. So on that basis, I cannot support this. Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to speak? Councillor Glenn?
Well, I think this is a great program, and if we can bring units on board, we're going to end up with a greater tax base, which will benefit the entire community. Unfortunately, even developers who have been doing well over the years, I think, are finding the pinch difficult. I think we often forget that they're business people, so they make business-based decisions. So if we can incentivize and get them to make those decisions more quickly because of the incentives, I think this is an opportunity to get those buildings up, online faster, and then add that to our tax base over time. So to me, that this is long-term planning, and we can't be short-sighted.
Councillor Rosenik?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I support this. It was part of our strategic plan. It's clear that we need more apartment rental units, and we asked a lot of questions 2 weeks ago at our last meeting. I was looking forward to tonight just to hear any public feedback, and I think our questions were really covered 2 weeks ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Glenn, would you take the chair?
I take the chair and recognize you.
So I support this too. I think that if we don't bring in more support into our tax base, it puts a lot more pressure onto the existing tax base if we don't increase our tax base. So that for that reason, that's why I'm going to support this.
Back to you.
All right, anybody who hasn't spoken would like to speak? So, all in favor? Opposed? and that carries with Councillor Shaves in the minority. All right, so now we'll move on to the next item, which is Planning Advisory Committee meeting notes. Are there any questions from the committee regarding this item? Seeing as none, can I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Shaves, seconded by Councillor Osanik. All in favor? Oh, what? It's the, oh, it's the Planning Advisory Committee meeting notes. So it's the minutes that we received and
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, we're just voting to receive the minutes. Oh, I think.
yeah. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the Planning Advisory Committee meeting notes come to Planning Committee for information, so it's built into their mandate. It's basically a committee that reports to the Planning Committee, and staff typically bring forward land use policy projects to that committee. It's made up of residents and representatives of institutional organizations and the business community. Thank you.
So,
All right, go ahead, Councillor
to be clear,
McLaren.
we're not endorsing this, we're just receiving this. Is
Yes.
that right? Okay.
Okay, any other discussion or concerns? No. All right, all in favor? And that passes. So there are no motions, there are no notices of motions. Is there any other business? Seeing as none, there was no correspondence. So the next meeting of the Planning Committee is scheduled for Thursday, May 16th, 2024 at 6 p.m. Do I have a mover and seconder for adjournment? Moved by Councillor Glenn, second by Councillor Wisterhoff. All in favor? And that passes. Have a good night, everyone.